Democrat Greg Casar now represents the 35th Congressional District of Texas and is one of nearly 80 new House members in the 118th Congress. A former member of the Austin, Texas City Council, he told C-SPAN about his previous work as a community and labor organizer, his progressive philosophy, and how his family first came to Texas from Mexico.
Well, my mom and dad both came here shortly before I was born. My dad is a physician in Texas, but actually my grandmother came back and forth from Mexico as well, because when there was violence in Mexico in the teens and the 20s, her father was killed, and her mother actually came pregnant over to Texas into El Paso, and then came back to Mexico, and that's where they grew up. And so in many ways, my family does things just like so many other families have, of coming back and forth between Mexico and Texas, ultimately making Texas a really great place to live. But I was born and raised in Texas, and I'm really proud of my state and honored to be able to represent it here.
What part of Texas?
I was born and raised in Houston. I've been a community organizer and an Austin City Council member, but my district stretches from downtown San Antonio all the way up to East Austin, and I've done a lot of work in San Antonio and all the areas in between. Really, those two cities are growing so rapidly that they're really working as a partnership now. Even though they're very different cities with different needs, it's really becoming more and more one community, and so I'm really proud to be able to represent both San Antonio and Austin.
You've been a longtime activist. When did that begin for you?
For me, my mom always taught me, as my grandmother did, about caring for others and looking out for everybody else, because none of us are really ultimately different from one another. And so to me, when I was in high school and some of the big marches around immigration reform were happening throughout Houston and throughout the country, some of the biggest demonstrations in this country in its history up until the Black Lives Matter movement of just a few years ago, that was really inspiring to me. And then when I was a student, I went to the University of Virginia, and I was organizing there alongside students and workers for a living wage, and back in Texas over the summers doing summer work and advocacy and organizing, particularly for workers that work outdoors in Texas in the Texas heat. There were no and are no rules guaranteeing people things like a basic right to a water break. So the first law that I ever worked on getting passed as an advocate was bringing construction workers together, immigrant and US born together, asking for City Hall to pass a basic right to a water break, and that law still stands today.
Where does your interest in labor rules and activism come from?
I see that throughout American history, the labor movement and workers coming together to demand a better deal has been the biggest counterbalance to exploitation in our democracy and at the workplace in our history. And so I've seen how people that get thrown aside or don't usually get considered by their government, when they come together, they can make big change. As I talked about, seeing construction workers come together and demand a water breaks law. Across the country, seeing fast food workers talk about a $15 an hour minimum wage. That used to be thought of as some sort of naive ask, something that was way too far flung to get to. But now, so many folks believe $15 should be the absolute minimum, if not something higher. And so I really believe that when people come together and use their collective voice, that's when you can make the most change. So although I'm a member of Congress, I don't come here thinking that I myself am the person that's going to drive significant change. I want to bring people together, especially at their workplaces or in their neighborhoods, to make a big difference. I don't believe just in worker organizing, also things like tenant organizing. I've done a lot of work bringing people together to form the first tenant organizations at mobile home parks and at buildings to make sure that people have a safe place to live or have water. Now some of the demands coming out of places like Texas is just guarantees that the lights will turn on, because we saw our entire grid get shut down because essentially of special interests privatizing our electric grid. So my interest really is in seeing that within our history, people coming together and using their voices collectively is what's moved this country forward.
Any plans to galvanize your fellow colleagues here in Congress on a grassroots level to try to make some changes here?
I think as members of Congress, we can be organizers in chief. We can validate and support our communities coming together with bolder ideas and bolder visions than whatever we think is possible. Even just in my first few weeks as a member of Congress, I can see how it can grind you down to see how slow it can feel like progress really is. But in my view, it's because it should be the people that lead and politicians that follow. And so if we as members of Congress actually empower people to demand change, that's what I think ultimately is the best whipper of votes. I'm proud this Congress to have been chosen by my peers to be the whip of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and I'll do my best to bring progressives together in the House and to highlight the amazing work that progressives do. But ultimately, I think the best whip is the American people demanding change. And so we'll hopefully be working and training fellow members of Congress on walking side by side with alongside workers that are demanding a union, or to bring people from our districts here to really try to demand change and try to get things moving in the Congress.
For those that don't know, you're counting the votes for the Progressive Caucus, and how many members are in that caucus?
We have more strong progressives in this Congress than any other time in modern history. There's a record 103 members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and I expect that those numbers actually may grow during this Congress. And so the whip position is helping count votes, helping put together the caucus's progressive agenda, and it's a really exciting position. It's the number 3 position within the caucus, alongside Chair Pramila Jayapal and Deputy Chair Ilhan Omar. And so I'm, as a freshman member, really honored and humbled to have been given the responsibility, and I'm going to work as hard as I can on it.
Who are your political heroes?
My very top political heroes have actually been people I met while I was on the Austin City Council, people that were brave enough to come and advocate for us to make political change even when they were enduring enormous pain. So people like Hannah Senko and Marina Garrett, who suffered horrible sexual assaults in Austin, oftentimes weren't believed, had their cases left in a case backlog. They were told time and time again that when they were bringing up issues that they were doing things like, quote, making mountains out of molehills, were the kinds of things I heard being said about them by people in power. But they kept on advocating until the council had to see the challenges for what they were and did things like clear the sexual assault kick backlog in our community and start addressing these cases much differently and demanding better from our prosecutors and our police department. Or people like Vanessa Bissereth, whose cousin and really, really close family member was needlessly killed on our streets when he was having a mental health crisis. So when people called the police to help him, was horrifically killed, and she has continued to advocate to make change in the community. And so to me, our heroes that come from the community and make those sorts of demands, they are what lead to things like the political heroes that we know about from Texas, like LBJ, moving forward the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act or the Fair Housing Act. Took real acts of bravery and leadership on his part to sign that kind of and push through that kind of big legislation. But you don't always hear about the heroes that were the everyday people, especially in the American South or in Texas, that were pushing leaders to ultimately do the right thing.